Technology.
Oh my gosh. Pete Stahl, you look good, bud. What's your secret, man? Seriously, you always look so healthy. I every time I see you, I say that. I go, Pete Stahl, you look great. Seriously.
Well, I probably look a little less stressed these days because I haven't worked in like 6 months. So just sitting on the front porch playing guitar and, hiking in the mountains over there.
I love that you're out on your porch right now. It's a hot one in LA today, right?
Woo! Yeah. I like it though. It makes me feel like I'm back home,
Oh yeah.
Because it's like kind of humid too, and so it's good. Swamp-like.
Hey, speaking of, because the heat, I mean, growing up in DC, summertime had to just be brutal for you, right?
Yeah, man. I mean, DC is built on a swamp, basically, on the banks of the Potomac River. Everything comes from that. And yeah, I grew up without AC my whole life. Summertime, boiling hot, 100% humidity, rainstorms every afternoon is the best.
Having you do this means so much to me because I'm a fan. Like, and I know that you're like, Joe, you say that every time, but I am, man. It's just, you're one of those singers. Scream was one of those bands that changed my life. It was definitely bands like, of course, Minor Threat, 7 Seconds, and Scream. And today, I was listening to that first record, Still Screaming, came out, 1983.
Well, those bands changed my life too. Being a part of that scene.
Yeah.
Being inspired by those bands as well. So when you're a musician, it's all a big family, kind of like.
Yeah, but as absolutely. But for me, being, a fan, those are the three bands that really kind of opened my eyes to, obviously Ian opened my eyes to, straight edge. 7 Seconds opened my eyes to, diversity and, looking at things, if we can walk together, if we can rock together, why can't we walk together? And then Scream, I was just listening, like even the lyrics on the first record, Bedlam in the Streets of the USA. Like today I was listening to those lyrics and I swear if someone turned me on to that song and that album, first of all, sonically, it still holds up. And no diss to a lot of our friends and the bands from that era. But what was going on in the studio, like sonically, because I saw Ian produced it with you, but man, sonically, it sounds still so good.
Well, I mean, we got lucky. It was a magical session. We were really comfortable in that studio. And in fact, that studio, which is the original Inner Ear studio, was on Ivy Street, which is my brother and I actually grew up a few houses down from that studio. It wasn't a studio when we were kids, but later on when we did our first record and we met Don Zantera and we did a demo there first with another guy, this guy Jefferson Rogers, who had a band called The Layman. We did like one of our first demos at that studio. And we met Don, and it was just like a little basement studio, classic, a duplex and you go down, and it was actually like his kids' playroom was the tracking room, and then it had this little side area where he had his little console and tape machine and all that, and Don Zantera is just the greatest guy to work with, and we didn't know what we were doing, and he made us feel at home and just kind of guided us through that. And we did that first demo, and then when we came back and did Still Screaming, we did like 21 songs, 3 days, wham, bam, bam, bam. And we had already been there before. We had just come off tour, so we were ready to go. So a lot of things kind of combined to make that happen. But certainly Don Zantera and Ian and Eddie and other people that were in the control room, we all kind of did that stuff together, and it was a lot of fun, and just kind of kept caught magic in a bottle.
Where were you? Because a lot at that time, like I said, the lyrics that you're singing and Bedlam in the Streets of USA, even Laissez-Faire, Solidarity, you're singing about a lot of topics.
Yeah, there was a lot of things going on, as there always is, and I think you were kind of inferring that you listen to Bedlam and you're like, it sounds like something writing about today, right?
Absolutely.
we are living through a lot of the same problems and things that we're dealing with. So, yeah, I was just kind of commenting and writing about what was happening around us, and I've always kind of done that. It's certainly a great starting point for any song.
Yeah, I feel like too, Scream was one of those bands. The Clash was that way for us as kids growing up. For me, at least, the lyrics drummer wrote, Mick Jones. They opened my eyes to so many things politically that I had never been aware of. Like, it wasn't the same thing when I listened to, say, Black Flag or the Circle Jerks. I love the Circle Jerks. Live Fast, Die Young. But then, bands like Scream and, like I said, 7 Seconds. You had I don't want to say an agenda, but you definitely had lyrical content that, hey, like, it's poppy and you're singing along. Like Laissez-Faire is still a singing song. America Rockers, that's a sing along, but the lyrics hit home so hard. How does it feel, 35 years later, you're sitting there, that these lyrics are still relevant today, and especially where we are as a society?
I mean, it feels good, and thank you for saying that. I mean, just kind of sing what I feel and write about what I see and feel, and I like communicating my thoughts that way through the music that we create together. And I guess, at the time, that was our first record, but I was a couple years older than the rest of the guys, and I think growing up in DC, there's something in the water there, that kind of made us musically, but also, politically, because it's just right there. You're around all the mongoose, you're around politics, and everyone's parents work in the government or military, So, and then, I think I told you before, my dad managed rock bands, and my brother and I started going to shows when we were really young, and we were kind of exposed to counterculture, and we were kind of seeing like a, DIY thing happening. I could feel it in the community of musicians that I was around, and it was like something was happening, and they're singing about what's going on around them, and the bands were. So I think it was a natural progression for me, especially being inspired also by a lot of bands from the 60s and to write about, what's happening on around us. So
I want to talk about you and your brother growing up. And then I want to kind of go into that community of music that you're talking about, because that community of music that you were a part of really for punk rock in that era was such an influential part of so many people's lives, but also just such a great time. But first, I got to say, because I know you've talked to me about it, but your brother's in the band with you, which I always loved because I was such a Ramones fan, and you guys were actually brothers, which I just thought, was so cool. But talk about, your dad, is he managing bands? Are you moving gear? Are you and your brother, does your brother pick up a guitar right away? Like, how does that all play in the Stahl house? What's going on? What are you guys listening to when you're talking about music? What are the things you grew up with?
My dad managed this band called the Hangmen, who were on Monument Records, and they had a regional hit in Washington, D.C. They were a pretty popular local band, and their record came out in 1966. And so my brother and I were going to shows before we were 10 years old, and they were kind of garagey, very poppy, Beatles kind of influenced band. Very popular in the scene, so we were going to clubs, and I mean, we were there. I remember seeing the Beatles on Ed Sullivan. Everyone wanted to be in a band after seeing that kind of, and but no, we didn't pick up instruments till later. Well, we had pretend instruments. I remember having a tennis racket and like an ottoman for a drum set. But no, we would just go to shows and be running around, having fun, hanging out with the band, and girls used to give us notes to pass to the singer and stuff like that. So, but it wasn't until later on that we actually, it actually kind of messed me up, to be honest, because by the time I was like 13, I was into jazz fusion because I'd already been into rock and roll when I was 10, so I had this musical progression. And then by then I was like, never even occurred to like start a band or play music, because I was like listening to Mahavishnu and Larry Coryell and all that stuff. So it wasn't until later on I went to boarding school and met some guys and started playing guitar and showed my brother. But it wasn't until my brother started a band with Skeeter in high school, and then I eventually joined up with them, and we started Scream, which it actually came out of Jeb Stuart High School.
When I hear you say boarding school, so is boarding school, hey, Pete needs to leave DC for a little while?
Yeah, I was kind of like that. I was a ward of the state of Virginia for most of my youth.
Okay. And I never knew that. So how are you kidding? Or are you being serious?
No, I'm not kidding.
Oh, okay. I never heard that part.
Yeah.
How many years were you at a boarding school, and what was that experience like? And where was it?
A couple different schools. It's one actually, it was like a Baptist boarding school, middle of nowhere, like as far southwestern Virginia you can get, mouth of Wilson, Virginia, dry Grayson County. I was like 14, and that was a pretty tough school. But now it's funny, it's like turned into like a basketball school. I don't if you ever seen, there's a lot of merch out there now for Oak Hill Academy. It's like a breeding ground for like top-notch basketball players. But then it was kind of a school for, but it was like a lot of dudes that gotten into trouble, nothing like major, but that, you know, just got turned over to the state. And it was kind of the last place before you got sent to military school, reform school or jail. And there was guys from all over the country. And I straightened up real quick, but, you know, I was there for like a year and then went back to public school, like 15, 16, but then fucked up again, got sent to another school that was called Gladen, that was in Leesburg, Virginia. It was kind of the country then too, which is out Loudoun County. And I mean, that was more of a progressive school, but each time it kind of corrected me, but also opened me up to a lot of stuff. Gladen's really where I learned how to play guitar, and you know, took that knowledge and showed it to my brother, and then he took it from there.
What's the age difference between your brother and you?
It's just 2 years.
So, okay, so at that point, you're you know, you've let,
I think that's one of the reasons why I got, my mom was just a single parent trying to raise 3 kids, and she just decided like, well, I'm going to send him over here. The state can take care of him, correct this guy's headspace, and so that she could focus on my brother and sister. And it was a smart move on her part.
But there has to be a moment though where, you know, you're coming and you're like you said, you're coming back and forth, you're going to the school, you're coming home, you're trying to get it straight, go to school for a little bit, split. I mean, is Franz at a certain point, like, are you and him tight? Are you like, is he like, bro, like just sort it out and live here? Or is it like, he's kind of almost like, dude, you're my older brother. Just, you know, like, cause at a certain point, it feels like the band is what all of a sudden grounds you to go, all right, you know what? I'm going to make this work.
Yeah. I never thought of that before, Joe. Thanks for asking that question. I mean, I was separated from the family. I mean, I was full on living away from home, couldn't come home. So my brother and I definitely were growing up separately, and not much communication in that regard. I didn't even know that he had started a band, you know, by the time when I was kind of going on my journey in life without my family. So,
so when you come back, at what point does he say, hey, this is my buddy Skeeter, we're starting a band? Like, how does that all of a sudden go from whatever band he had, you've been having your journey, now all of a sudden you're back in DC? And is punk rock at this point hitting? Like, are you discovering punk rock from kids at these boarding schools? You know, I mean, you went from, like you said, rock to fusion to all of a sudden you're singing in a band. How does that journey happen?
Well, I graduated in 77, and that was the year I came back, because I came home and graduated from Stewart. And that's when I, you know, discovered Franz and Skeeter had started a band, but I still wasn't hanging with them. I was kind of only going to school like half a day and doing like work release kind of thing. And I started working at this restaurant called Joe Theismann's Restaurant. And and I got my brother a job there and Skeeter a job there. So that's kind of when we started hanging out more. And I got my own, and then as soon as I could, I got my first apartment straight out of high school. And that's when I really then started, you know, being aware of those guys being in a band and stuff. And then once I had a house, that's when we started the band. But as far as music, you know, like that's late 70s. We still weren't really old enough to get into nightclubs. So we started learning about punk rock and new wave, mostly new wave from the local radio stations in town, which were great. And were essential for its educating us on what was going musically, what was happening in England at the time, like current stuff. And then also there was one station in particular, WHFS at the time. I'd always used as kind of a teacher, you know. I mean, it used to have great overnight blues shows and DJs. Got a real great education on the blues from that station. But yeah, there was some shows on HFS, and then, you know, because DC has a lot of universities, there's Georgetown University had a killer radio station called WGTB. American University had WAMU. All these cool local radio shows that used to play just a wide variety of music. DC is a big roots kind of town. Always has been musically, with like R&B and country music, bluegrass, and soul music. So finally, when I started getting to sneak into some clubs and seeing some bands, and I first saw some new wave bands that had big influence on me that I would tell Franz and Skeeter about. And then at that time, we were already kind of writing in the basement, trying to write our own songs and playing a lot of covers. A lot of that stuff, like from my dad's band era from the 60s, play, you know, a lot of the first stuff we learned was like a band called The Music Machine. We did Talk Talk, Strychnine by the Sonics, or He's Waiting by the Sonics. A lot of Flamin' Groovy stuff.
Man, what a great set list right there.
Magic Carpet Ride, what, Steppenwolf. Hot Smoke and Sassafras by Bubble Puppy. We learned all this stuff. That we had a whole set. We started playing keg parties, and then we started sprinkling in stuff that we learned. But there was also like all the British punk that we were being exposed to and getting into, like the Stranglers, the Buzzcocks, the Lurkers, Sham 69, all that stuff. And there was one particular DJ, this guy Steve Lorber, who's still DJing, I think, had this show called the Mystic Eye Show, and that's where we got played on first, I think, maybe on his show, and so did a lot of the like Teen Idols and those guys. He started playing stuff from our scene early on too. But I mean, I learned a lot of we would catch a lot of music from his show as well. So yeah, it was through that foray into clubs and seeing new wave bands and the radio stations definitely in the area that kind of gave us our education and our, foundation.
What were those? So after, the keg parties, the covers, and then you're sprinkling in your original.
That was always fun because we were coming from new wave punk rock, and we were the only band in our area, Bailey's Crossroad, doing it. Everybody, typical story where if you get up there and play, everyone's yelling Freebird at you, And so that's how we developed our thing, and we got our own little clique going, and that was always fun,
At what point do you guys go, you know what, man, we're going punk rock, we're doing this thing Scream, and you get that together? And what do you remember of, like, say, your first show that you're like, okay, we're Scream, this is, here we go, we're gonna, Came Without a Warning, because that style of punk rock that you guys played, like even this morning when I was listening to Still Screaming, when It Came Without a Warning comes on, that whole first, I mean, it's one of the best intros to an opening of an album. I think it's like, the 30-second song. But when I was listening to it now, at the age that I'm at now, I understand how much of the Bad Brains were an influence on you, because you guys are so tight and these changes. And I I even remembered this today, listening to you guys and listening to Social Distortion, because I was into both of those bands at the same time. The music that Social Distortion was playing, I loved, but I could almost get my head more around the changes because there weren't so many. The Ramones, you know what I'm saying? There was not a lot of chord changes. It wasn't so complex. Now, what you're doing in that first 40 seconds, da 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 da. I mean, it's like, as a kid, I remember I'm like, all right, I want to start a band, but it can never be like Scream because I don't know anyone that can play like that. Yeah. So, do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, I know what you're saying, and I think, well, that definitely a Bad Brains huge influence on that, and I think part of that when we got into the Bad Brains, and when we won, they blew us away when we saw them. I got lucky enough to this girl that we had a group house we were living with. She brought me to this place called Madam's Organ. It was like this art gallery in this row house downtown. I was scared shitless. And I saw the Bad Brains and the Teen Idols that day in this little row house. And it was awesome. I mean, it was dangerous feeling. And they looked so cool and sounded so rad. And at that time, they weren't playing at breakneck speed that they ended up doing. But from that point on, and and then turning Franz and Skeeter onto them, they were playing Pay to Come on the radio, the old 45 version, which is like half the speed of what you get on the Roar cassette. But yeah, we wanted to, and our whole musical background from what, like I was telling you, what we're from about, and also there's that whole side of them, Skeeter coming from Spring Hill and all the music that he was into, and him and Franz, and so one other component, Skeeter's on the high school football team. My brother played baseball. I played basketball. So we were kind of jocks, stoner jocks, kind of, So we kind of approached music athletically too. So we wanted to be fast and badass and tight as shit. And so like the Bad Brains. So we would dedicate ourselves like we were athletes in a way to getting that way. So we would get like that. So then you can kind of see where that came from, and what we were aspiring to, and we got pretty close.
Yeah, I mean, what you're saying, but it's funny what you're saying, because what you're saying is being in sports, whether or not basically you brought, I want to say, like maybe that competitiveness to being in a band, because you were like, if we're going to do this, let's do it right. And I think what you just said nailed exactly what I'm talking about in that first, 40 seconds of Still Screaming and Came Without a Warning, because it is seriously, it's a punch to the face. It's relentless, and it really sets up for the entire album. And I feel like it really set up, that record came out 37 years ago. And I feel like that really set up the journey that Scream began right there at that moment, at least for me, being a kid from the West Coast and hearing that, because like I said, what you were doing lyrically, musically was definitely different than the rest of the bands that we were all listening to. Now, the other thing that I just learned, and you just said it, is I think the musicianship that you had from learning all those covers and from growing up around that music, you're not jamming, the songs you just mentioned, Magic Carpet Ride, unless you know how to play. And I think that right there, you guys, that now the missing ingredients come into mind, that everyone showed up with a bag of tricks, not like, I've never touched my instrument before. Like
I said, Skeeter and Franz had started a band before, and they were into all the like progressive rock and Parliament Funkadelic heavily, and so. And Kent Stax also, he wasn't the original drummer, but he was. I don't know if he ever. I don't know if he ever took any lessons, but he was definitely classically trained in kind of in the way that he plays. He's playing that drum riff on "Came Without Warning," which kind of. I hope I don't ruin it for you, but it's kind of like the drum beat for "Immigrant Song," but
no, it is.
The beginning,
yeah.
But, he plays. He's all wrist, which and like that's why now today, almost 40 years later, we're still play, and we can pretty much play at the same level. Well, I know that we do, and but he can play the same way that he did because, you know, he can effortlessly do it because he's not bashing away. He's just, you know, it's all wrist. And, I mean, he still smokes while he plays, which I don't know how to, but, so you definitely, I guess I would just wanted to answer that those guys definitely had skills. I was just barely knew, you know, basic chords on guitar, which is all I still know, which serves me all right. And then I kind of learned how to sing by trying to sing over top of them. But those guys definitely had the skills. They brought it to the table. Now, one thing I wanted to say was those keg parties that when we first started playing, our first shows were in basements and keg parties in and around Bailey's Crossroad. And then our first show was actually like, I think it was at Louis Rock City, which was a like heavy metal rock club in Bailey's Crossroad, and we played a battle of the bands there. But our set was a combination of covers, you know, like garagey stuff and new wave punk rock. We also covered some local new wave bands like the Raz, which was a big influence on us, and the singer Michael Reedy, huge influence on me, just like HR. And but we actually wrote we had a whole collection of originals that we kind of discarded after we kind of got into the hardcore scene. And they were still kind of politically topical. Like we had a song called It Ain't Right, which was just about Fairfax County police always busting up our keg parties or our shows, our parties. And we had a song called Brainwash, which was about government control. We had a whole collection of songs that we went through before we did Still Screaming. And by the time we got to Still Screaming, we were playing like twice as fast as we were that first collection. I wish to God that we would have recorded that first stuff that we had, because it would have been a nice document to have. And but I don't even find any recordings of that stuff anywhere.
Man, I'd love to hear all that, because that would really it'd be like hearing the demos almost of your songs early on, and then kind of seeing the progression.
There's one place you can catch a little flavor of it is that first demo I was talking about that we did with Jefferson Rogers at Don Zentera's. It was like a 4 or 5 song demo. And later on, like when Discord put out Still Screaming and This Side Up on a double CD, they added like a song called Ultra Violence, and I think the Still Screaming fast version from that demo is on that CD. And you can hear the difference of the band from that demo to Still Screaming later on.
Yeah. Hey, when you just mentioned Discord right there, you can't not mention you can't mention DC without mentioning Discord Records, Minor Threat, Ian MacKaye, Teen Idols, obviously Bad Brains.
Now we got the Evens and Koricki.
The what?
Ian's new band?
No. Oh, wait. Is that the band that he has? Is it with his wife?
Well, he has a band with his wife called the Evens.
Okay.
They have a couple releases out, and then they just recently, like about 2 months ago, he has a new band with Joe Lally from Fugazi called Koricki. I think it's called Koricki, Korkicky. I'm not sure.
And they released one song, right?
No, they have a whole album out.
Okay. Yeah, I think I heard one song though.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The thing I wanted to ask you is, so, for everyone else, we grew up, hey, I remember when Minor Threat came through for the first time through the West Coast. I was there the first time you guys came through the West Coast. I always tell that story. And one of the reasons we all came to see you play that night at the On Broadway during the summer was because you were on Discord Records. Now, I think I'm right on this, because I think you told me, wasn't Scream the first release on Discord that wasn't Minor Threat? Like the first full length that came out?
No, I mean, what it is we were the first full length, the first album.
Full length. There you go. Okay.
Everything up to that point, we were Discord number 9.
Okay.
Yeah, the 8 previous releases were 45s.
Got it. Okay. If you can just walk me through it, what at this point in DC, what's going on before you guys decide? What's the music climate like? What's the community of music? Who, Ian, how does it all come about? Like, what is it? Is it just a friend that's in another rad band and you're like, dude, we should do something together? Like, how does that all come about?
We didn't become friends or really get to know each other till while we made the record. I mean, we were acquainted. We had played a couple shows in the scene, so-called scene. Like Bad Brains got us our first show at the Wilson Center, but mostly we had been playing at like little clubs around town, new wave clubs, Posers. This is the name of one place, or and the Stone Hearth out by in Bailey's Crossroad, and these parties. But we still weren't completely in the mix. So, and then we were ready to roll, and we went on tour in 1982 before we did Still Screaming. So
I think that's when I see you at the On Broadway,
yeah,
right?
Yeah. So, which was great because, it taught us a lot about how to be a band, and we, hashed out our songs and went around the country one time. And it was when we got back, we kind of played like, you probably remember like when you went on a tour and you come home and you play your hometown show after being on tour, it's like a big deal. And so, and maybe, some of the word had gotten back home, like that, that we were playing well, so to speak, and so we played a show at this mill in Maryland, I think it was, and Ian was at that show, and after that show, we were talking, and he said, you asked us if we want to do a record for Discord, so we had to earn our stripes.
How'd that feel when he when he sits down and goes, hey, let's do a full length?
Well, I mean, it's everything we've been waiting for, really, because we definitely wanted to be a part of that scene, and it took a minute, because it's funny to look back at these and at those times, but the first times we played with the bands that we ended up becoming tight with, like SOA and Minor Threat and those bands, at first when we played some shows, like we played this one in Woodlawn High School, can't remember all who played, but when we played, everyone in the scene walked out, and we're just hanging. Most of the people just were hanging outside, not paying any attention, just because they, we were from Bailey's Crossroads, kind of like goofy jock dudes, and we weren't in the mix yet. We weren't in the scene. We weren't accepted yet. That's how it goes. And there were some other bands Void was from Columbia, Maryland. And I remember at that particular show, those guys were like, they were watching us, some of them were. I don't know if people were like, it's just, we were all young and everything. I don't know if people were definitely just being like disrespecting us. But one thing about that show is DOA showed up. They were on tour and they knew there was a place to play and they showed up. Maybe they got invited. So I think everyone was just hanging out with them, greeting them and stuff, So that was a really cool show too, though. I'll never forget. And I think if you ever get a chance to talk to Jello, you could ask him about this. And I still have a piece of paper because he was there. I guess he was on tour with DOA. And so he was with them. And he knew that we were bummed that everyone had left while we were playing. And I didn't even know who he was. And he came up to me and he said, I really liked your band. And he's like, can you send me your demo? And like, don't worry about it. Just keep doing what you're doing. Just what a great thing for him to do that. And he gave me his address and it meant a lot to me. And because we were kind of down that everyone had kind of walked out, because it was a big moment for us to play that show.
Isn't that crazy?
So yeah, it's all just, it's how things go in scenes, it's funny, but we didn't give up.
Oh no, man. It's crazy when you tell a story like that, because here you are, you're playing, you know, you're about to make your record, Still Screaming, all this great things going on. You guys go out there on stage, everyone, you know, walks out. And then the last thing that you would have ever thought, man, that is that Jello Biafra from the Dead Kennedys would walk up and say, hey, I really dig what you're doing. Don't worry about them walking out. Keep doing it. Send me your demo. I mean, at that point,
I didn't know who the Dead Kennedys were. So I didn't know it. So I don't know.
So it might have even bummed you out more. Who's this guy? Who's this guy bothering me?
No. This was a long time ago. I don't remember exactly, but
oh man,
I don't think I knew who he was. You know?
Yeah. What was, hey, you know, those early shows that you guys would all go to, you know, I see the videos of Minor Threat. I've seen the videos of you, you know, Scream, Bad Brains. Like, what is, like, when you think of, you know, going to shows, like I have in my mind, I have a show that I always say it was legendary. It was, America's Hardcore opening up, band that was, I believe, from the Bay Area. Next band, 7 Seconds. Kevin's playing guitar at this point. It's a 3-piece. And then you roll into Youth Brigade, you know, Stern Brothers, just on fire at this moment. They were like America's version of Sham 69. And then the last band is, of course, Minor Threat. So it's just one of these shows that I always just say to people, like, I still can't believe I was there for that. What are some of the lineups that you think about back there in DC that you were like, did I really just walk in and see that? Did, you know, just what are some of the nights that you remember?
One show that sticks out to me is we played with Minor Threat one time in Baltimore, and it was Youth Brigade played on that show actually, and that was when they were there filming that movie that they did.
Another State of Mind.
Yeah, that one. Then another show that I always have in my mind is when we played CBGB's the first time. And
what was that like?
Man, we've never been to New York City, and all of a sudden I'm on the Lower East Side, out in front, you know, keeping an eye on the van, the backstage, and you know there was 1,000 people there to see the Bad Brains. It was packed. They had already kind of like destroyed, you know, they were just like creating this thing, man. It was like electric. For sure.
What do you think? What do you think for Bad Brains? Because, you know, as another band that as we each year goes by, they still don't lose any cool factor at all. Like I didn't get to see him until Eye Against Eye came out. So, you know, which was amazing. And I remember me and my buddies, we saw him in San Francisco. They were so amazing. And then we were driving back to San Jose. And as you drive to San Jose, there's a sign that says Sunnyvale, San Jose. And then for some odd reason, it says Los Angeles, you know, 284 miles. And one of us yelled road trip because we knew Bad Brains were playing. And we literally just said yes. And we drove straight through, still in our sweaty clothes that we had worn, got to the show. And I want to say Dr. No had told us, yeah, man, if you guys come down, I'll get you in. And I, you know me, I was like, hey, what's up, man? And he's like, wow, you guys actually showed up. All right, you're on the guest list. And, you know, they changed my life, but I didn't get to see him in those earlier years. What was it that, like, when you're seeing him in like those, you know, like you said, you saw him at like a mill, or you saw him at, you know, CBGB's, like what do you think, what was it that was going on stage that has that element, that thing? What was that thing?
Well, they were kind of in one with the audience. It was a combination of the high energetic music they were playing, of course, the crowd participation, the pit, the stage dive, and all that. But then, you know, when they would go and, you know, when HR would do a backflip, and when he'd land on his feet, they would go instantly into another song or into a dub reggae song, you know, and break it down and just bring everyone together. And it's just, you know, a moment of magic.
Yeah, definitely a band that unified so many people. You know, that was the biggest takeaway that I had from seeing them.
Hey, do you remember where you saw them in Los Angeles?
Yeah, I saw them in Long Beach.
Oh,
yeah, they did a show. I forget, it wasn't at Fender's. It was like at a college.
Okay.
And yeah, they did. The first night I saw them was at the Farm in San Francisco. That was the first time I saw him.
Where?
The Farm. You remember the Farm in San Francisco? Yeah.
We played there with Dead Kennedys.
Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah. So that was like my for us in the Bay Area. I started out, the first club was the On Broadway, where I saw you guys. Underneath the On Broadway was a place called the Mabuhay Gardens. I don't know if you ever played
there too.
Okay. And then across the street was the metal club called the Stone. And it was crazy because I remember one night, it's a crazy, everyone always kind of remembers this. Motley Crue was at the Stone playing, and Bad Religion was playing at the On Broadway. And they were both bands from LA that, they both knew of each other, but it was like, one side of the street was sold out with people into Motley Crue, and the other side was a bunch of punks. Then later on, when those clubs went away, the Farm was our main club. Same time Gilman Street, started happening. But
we had a show like that kind of one time. We played up at this place called Gorilla Gardens in Seattle, and we were playing, I can't remember if it was upstairs or downstairs. It was Scream, and Guns N' Roses was playing downstairs. Probably, I would have thought the bigger place. I don't know, but that. I
got a segue for just a second because it pops up when you say Guns N' Roses. Of course, I think of Duff, and if you know Duff, how deep he goes into punk rock. Are you and him friends?
We're acquainted. In fact, I talked to him at the Clash Jesse Malin event that Gates of the West.
I saw you at that. Yeah, we sang. You sang. Yeah, we all sang together.
Yeah, that's right. And I talked to him briefly backstage, and he said, "Yeah, my first band opened up for you at Metropolis," which I'd forgotten about.
It's funny with Duff, man. No one really knows. Like, we all had heard that he was punk rock, but when you talk to Duff, I mean, he talks about going on the road with DOA. He talks about up in Seattle when he was in the Farts. He was in 10-Minute Warning.
Yeah, that's when he said 10-Minute Warning. He said played with us at that show at the Metropolis, and he's the nicest guy, man.
Oh, nicest guy ever. And what's funny when you hang out? Like, it's funny because like guys like Dave Grohl, guys like Duff McKagan. Okay, there are these guys that obviously have these insane careers, right? But what's so crazy is when you start talking to them about music, they're just a dude like us. They're
you just remind me. He told me a story about because he was good friends with Al Block, the bassist in Wool, because the Block brothers are from Seattle, and him and his brother Kurt, who also has a band called the Fastbacks, they had their first band was called the Cheaters, and I guess Duff was like he was a huge Cheaters fan. Like before he was in a band, he was going to see them play. So he told me, he's like, the first time I played and Al Block was in the audience in front of me, I was so nervous. I kicked him in the head.
Duff kicked Al in the head?
That's what he said. He said he was like nervous and he like kicked him in the head and like didn't know what to do, I guess. But yeah. So yeah, I'm just that emphasizes your point.
Yeah. It's funny because I remember the first time I met Duff. The reason I met him, I was DJing on Indie 103.1 in Los Angeles, and they had an inside number, and the numbers would ring when it was just regular requests, and you knew that. But there was this one other phone that only rang if it was the program director or something else, and you knew if it rang, it was either like. Not to say that it would be bad news, but it might be the program director. But at Indie 103.1, it was so lax. It would be the program director saying, "I'm on the 101. I love what you're playing." Or Steve Jones would call up on it and go, "Hey, mate, what was that last band you played?" But I remember one night it rang and it was Duff. And he goes, "Hey, who is this?" And I'm like, "Who's this?" He's like, "I asked first." And I'm like, "Oh, this is Joe Sib." He's like, "Did you just play the damn Disco Man?" And I go, "Yeah." And he goes, "Dude, you and I gotta be friends." And I'm like, what? Okay, yeah. And then, after that, I remember, we started, we'd see each other and talk, but it was crazy because we would talk about punk rock and you would totally forget that this guy, was in Guns N' Roses. Not because Guns N' Roses isn't punk rock, but just he would talk more and more about, even during this quarantine, him and I got on the phone one day and he asked me, we were talking about Bay Area, and we were talking, and he goes, "Hey man, do you remember a band called Whipping Boy?" And I'm like,
Oh.
"Yeah." Eugene from Whipping Boy is my friend, and he tells this great story about Eugene and Whipping Boy, and then he goes, "Hey, you wouldn't know how to get a hold of him." I'm like, oddly enough, I have his email, and I connected them, and Eugene was like, but it was funny because Eugene, I guess, only knew Duff from like, what wasn't Duff in the Fastbacks for a minute, or he has something to do with the Fastbacks. I think he might have played with them for a second.
Might have. That's highly possible.
But I remember, he's talking about all the bands, and then Eugene remembered him as a kid from this band, the Farts, that came down from Seattle to play.
Right. Do you remember one thing about Whipping Boy? I remember the first time I saw them. Do you remember how fucking huge their guitar player was?
Oh yeah. They were I think he was a football player on Stanford.
Yeah, I mean, he was like so big, like, and holding the guitar was hilarious. That was band. That was one band you knew you didn't want to fuck with.
Oh, no way. And on top of it, they all were students at Stanford. And I remember they had Whipping Boy, and they had the best sticker. It said, "Whipping Boy, knowledge is power." And I remember I was like, wow, like my dad was so down. Like my dad never saw Whipping Boy or ever heard any of their music, but he to this day still says he loves Whipping Boy because it says knowledge is power. Oh man, what a crazy time, man. Crazy time. I want to now drift into, because I don't want to hold you here forever, but I could ask you so many questions. One thing before we get into the Complete Control radio sessions and the Scream record that we did together, I want to kind of just, so you're in Scream and you're doing that. You guys, going over to Europe. I mean, even the journey with Scream is crazy. I mean, Dave Grohl is your drummer before he joins Nirvana. I mean, can you kind of, I mean, I know you've answered that question probably a million times, but I mean, how, like, I mean, once again, when, Dave Grohl, not as Dave Grohl, the Foo Fighters, you know him as the dude in the back of the van blowing heat, just like everyone else, like, dude, what are you doing? I mean, like how does he get into the band? And then how do you remember when he says, "Hey man, I'm going up to drum, I'm going to audition for this band Nirvana"? Do you remember like that whole journey?
Yeah. I mean, that was, Scream. Well, that particular moment you're talking about, Scream had been on tour. We were in the middle of a tour. We were in LA, camped up at my sister's house up in Laurel Canyon. And my sister was mud wrestling at the Tropicana at the time.
What?
Yeah. So we were in this house full of girls that were mud wrestlers. It was awesome. And we were playing these shows. We were playing a bunch of shows in these small little clubs, like the Gaslight, Coconut
Raji's, probably. Raji's,
possibly. And we had just come down to West Coast, where in SF we played the I-Beam.
Okay, totally remember the I-Beam.
Yep, and I remember the Nirvana guys came to the I-Beam show. We met them there. But anyway, so Skeeter was having some family problems, and so he left to deal with that and went back to DC, and we still had half the tour to do, and we were stuck there. We kind of started looking to get a bass player because we didn't have any money. We had still like 20 shows to get home, and during that time frame, Nirvana called up. They heard we were broke down there and shipwrecked, and they asked them to come up and play a few shows, because at that point, Dale from the Melvins had been playing drums for them. So they had a interim drummer. And so he went up there and played the show. And of course, they asked him if he would join the band, because it's basically the same thing for us. When first time, when Kent had was going to have his first child with his wife and said he didn't want to go on tour anymore. And we were a touring machine. That's all we did. We tour around the US, and we go over to Europe, tour around Europe. And so Skeeter told me about this kid drummer. And as soon as I saw him play, I was like, damn, that, everyone in the club was watching him instead of the band, basically.
What band did you see him with?
It was a really cool band he had called Dane Bramage. Should try to dig up their records. So it was a real easy transition. He came over. We had one rehearsal. He knew all the songs because he had been a fan of the band, and it just clicked like that. He was ready to get out of town, so we went on tour. So same thing when he went up to play with Nirvana. He just, you know, clicked right away. They asked him to join the band. He did call down, told us what he was going to do, and, you know, we wished him well. So, you know, that's how that went. And then it turned out to be, you know, another step in the journey that my brother and I have had in music, and we decided to stick it out in LA.
Is that when you end up living in LA, and like when I start seeing you?
Yeah, we basically.
So what year is that when you're there? When this happened?
Like 91, something like that.
So that's
and so yeah, it was a turning point in our lives, but you know, it was kind of, that's how things are meant to happen sometimes, you know. And then we stayed, and you know, Dave kept us abreast of what was going on with him, and they ended up coming back down to LA and recording Nevermind, and you know, we got to see that happen.
Yeah, so 91 is, I moved to LA in 90, and then I think the first time I meet you again and go, I'm like, wait, I know Pete, I know this guy. I want to say, then all of a sudden you'd made the transformation and doing sound, and you did, and I remember you mixed Wax. Am I right when I say the Lingerie or something like that? Like, where were you doing sound in LA that we played a show? And then,
it would have been the Viper Room.
Okay, Viper Room. There you go.
Yeah. I you know, lucked into a job there through, do you remember Kim White?
Kim White.
She used to she managed Screaming Trees. This is like early 90s, and she was booking the Viper Room. She was one of the first bookers.
Okay.
And she knew me through the music scene, I went in there, and someone told me they were looking for a stage manager, and I got hired there, and then learned the ropes and learned audio and started mixing up there too.
Yeah, because I remember my buddy Jack was a bartender there. Yeah. And he was like, hey man, there's a guy that works here I think you might know. And I was like, really, who? And he says, yeah, Pete Stahl. I go, oh my God. And then I remember I go up there, and at that point, you know, Wax started doing shows. And then I remember we connected. And then, you know, then I remember I went out on the road, and we were all on the road. And then all of a sudden you went from like doing the Viper Room, and then you were tour managing. And then it was like, who were you on the road with? Who was at that point? Do you start tour managing like all the time? Who was it? Wasn't it a band out of the desert?
It would have been Queens of the Stone Age.
There you go.
Yeah, I was kind of a jack of all trades with them. I mean, it was on their first record. They were on Loose Groove Records out of Seattle, and I had already become tight with those dudes because with Wool we used to play shows with Caius. We actually did a split single with Caius, and so I kind of just fell into the whole tour managing thing. You know, I've always been the guy in the band to book the shows. As far as Scream, you know, I booked our first tour in Europe, and collect the money, you know, and plan everything out. So those skills served me well in being a tour manager, and so. Yeah, Queens was one of the first bands that I was like an official tour manager, but I also was, at the time, I was like tuning, you know, they were just starting out, so they had no budget for crews. So I was tuning guitars and also singing backups on as well. So, and driving and a little bit of everything. And, you know, and then I was tour managing that band Cave In, which I've always been really lucky. It's a band called OPM, Blood Brothers. And then, you know, I was out with the Foo Fighters, that first record. And so that learned a lot, you know, from that, and still doing that mostly to make ends meet.
Yeah, man, I don't want to say it's lucky. I want to say you're a good guy, Pete. That's why people love having you around, you know?
Thank you.
So, I mean, all right. I mean, we'll close it with this. Like I said, I could have you here all day. I love your stories. So, all right. the Complete Control radio sessions was something that we did at SideOneDummy Records while I was a host on Complete Control Radio that was on Indie 103.1 for, gosh, I want to say close to 10 years. Really cool radio station. And at that point, we used to do these sessions where we would have a band come in and they would record an EP. Everyone from Bouncing Souls did it to Scream. I was so excited when Scream did it. And then randomly, you all had the idea that, hey, we're going to do it at, 606 Studio, which is the Foo Fighters studio. And hey, Dave's going to produce it. And not only did you and Dave and all of you guys do the record together, but then when we came out with the record, we also did like an interview together on the radio, and Dave came over to Side One. And, it was funny. He was supposed to go to Europe the next day. He drives over in some little like Volvo. I don't know if you remember this. You go, yeah, he's going to be there. You said to me, he's going to be there at noon. And I said, all right, I'll make sure we get him in and out. And you said, yeah. Okay. That sounds good. And I go, okay, cool. So like, we just had him planned to be there at 12. He was going to do the interview with me and you, and then he's supposed to leave at 1. He ended up staying there till about 4 o'clock because all he wanted to do was drink coffee. And like him and I talked punk rock. And then my partner, Bill Armstrong, and him talked metal. And it was at a certain point, he looks at his wife and he looks at his watch and he goes, shit, I got to go. I'm supposed to go to Europe tomorrow. I should be home. We just go, all right, man, see you later. But you pulled that all together. And once again, I was listening to the Complete Control session that we did with you. It's about 9 years old, and it came out actually this week, 9 years ago. And once again, it came out 2011. Yeah. So it's 9 years old. We like to do things differently. I rather do a 9-year anniversary than a 10, but yeah, I know. But what I wanted to, when I listened to this Complete Control session, like right away, it is so Scream, and like, but there's a different vibe on it. Like, like jamming at 606 reminds me of just straight ahead Scream, kind of that Bad Brains, just that, that rhythm, it's simple, it's there, but it's very fierce.
That is actually a Bad Brains song.
Is it really?
Yeah,
no.
I just changed the lyrics. It's a song.
Which one is it?
Jamming at the Atlantis.
Oh,
Jamming
shit.
Jamming at the Atlantis tonight. Yeah, no, it's one of their first songs they ever wrote. And the Atlantis was the original. That was the building that the 930 Club was in. Was the Atlantic building, and it was called and so that's where they started out playing there too. So they had that song as one of the first songs that they ever did. So then since we were doing that session at 606, we just did the lyrics jamming at 606. But that's Bad Brains song.
Okay, that makes me feel so good because I was like, man, this sounds so much like the Bad Brains. Okay, so I'm not a moron.
And also I'm sorry to keep interrupting you, but when you recently put up Complete Control sessions on your Bandcamp, I uploaded because there was one outtake from that session because we never finished. We only did half the song, or it was kind of, there was some, we did something else by Eddie Cochran, but more like the band The Move version. I don't know if you ever heard their version.
No.
And so we recorded that at that session, but it's not on the record. But I uploaded it. It's on the Bandcamp, so you can kind of hear our version of something else. And that's one of the songs I was talking about that we would play at those keg parties back in the day when we first started out. That was one of the first cover songs. It's something else, which also the Sex Pistols did. But we were always more into the Move version or the Eddie Cochran version. But so that's on there, and that's the beauty of your Complete Control sessions is it's live, and that just like Still Screaming. I mean, that was a fun session. And it kind of, we got lucky, and I think it captured the energy and the vibe of it perfectly.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that I love about it is the talking in between. You really feel like you're in the session. One of the songs on there that just hit me such an Iggy vibe was the Get Free song. I mean, Get Free just has like an Iggy Stooges. Mm-hmm. Am I in the ballpark right there? Like it has I love it.
I throw some harp down on that song too.
Yes, you do. Another jam on there.
That song's basically about getting in trouble, fucking up, and getting another chance.
Yeah, man. The other song on there that I really like It's such a good vibe, and it reminds me of something that even could be on Still Screaming, the first record. Is Elevate.
Yeah.
That has
Yeah.
a, you
Thank
know,
you. I mean,
the backups.
we write a lot of songs that I hope that communicate optimism and positive mental attitude, PMA, and that's what we sing a lot about.
I really like I love the, the chorus is elevate. And then, am I right when it says, and Captain Right, something like that? Elevate is that right? Captain Right?
Yeah. I don't know off the top of my head, but yeah, there's a captain, Skeeter's got a nickname. We call him Captain Wad Wad. But yeah, say Captain, I don't know.
Yeah. I love it. I love it. It's such and the thing about the session, particularly that session, was, when I think you guys went up to 606, we kind of, you and I and everyone had talked like, do we want it live or do we not? And it was like, because some people had, the other ones were more studio takes, but with your record, it reminds me, I don't know if you remember the GBH record, Leather Bristol Studs and Acne, where you can hear the band talking in between, like, Colin is, Wolf Scott Horns, and then, they're talking to each other. And as a kid, I remember I nerded out. Like, I would listen like, dude, what's that noise? And you can hear the guitar, or like someone, hitting a bass or something like that. So the thing I love about this session is it really captures the energy of the band. And, to think that 9 years ago we did this, and to think, I mean, you and I, gosh, we've been friends since 90, and it's just, it was cool when I hit you up and I said, hey man, I know that, it's the 9-year anniversary of the Complete Control Sessions. Can we do something around it? And I'm just glad that we were able to pull that all together, because it is a special record. And for me, as the guy, one of the co-owners of SideOneDummy, and I mean this, Pete, it was really full circle for me. I mean, I saw you guys in 1982. I had braces and acne. My dad drove me to the show. I think I followed you guys around, like, hey, I have the record, so the chance to get to work with you and put it out and still to be, friends with you over all these years is just, I look at this as like, wow, if you would have told me that night when I went to the On Broadway, that you and I'd be talking into these screens, 35 years. Yeah. It's crazy.
That is crazy. Well, I mean, we're totally stoked to be a part of your series. And I'm glad that we had that collaboration. Thank you, Joe. And thank you, Bill.
Well, I can tell you this, man. And Bill, I can speak for Bill on this 100%. And he's someone that I would never say that about, like, cause Bill, he's him and I say crazy shit sometimes. But one thing I can say right now, and he would say it with me, there would not be a SideOneDummy Records if there wasn't Scream and 7 Seconds and Minor Threat and Bad Religion. These were all the bands that we loved. And the fact that we get to work with you and we had an opportunity to do this was awesome, man. And I can't thank you enough, man. I mean, Jesus, you spent an hour and 5 minutes with me. And I could keep going.
I'm happy to talk with you. Thanks a lot, Joe. Appreciate it.